Hello. Today we will be discussing lupus, an autoimmune disease.
First, some background on lupus. As we mentioned before, lupus is an autoimmune disease, which means it forces the body to attack itself. Now, there are three kinds of lupus. There's systemic lupus erythematosus, which is also known as SLE, and that's the most common form. There's also cutaneous lupus, which is very rare, and drug-induced lupus, which is most common amongst teens. Some causes for lupus include race or ethnicity. In fact, African American women are 3 times more likely to contract lupus compared to Caucasian women. Family history, as lupus can be passed down through genetic material, and in some cases of extreme stress, lupus can be contracted. But the most major and prominent cause is actually gender. In fact, there's a 9-to-1 ratio that exists between women and men, meaning that there's 9 times as many women infected with lupus compared to men. And lastly, lupus cannot be transferred from person to person. As you can see, the two images, on the left, there's healthy blood cells, whereas on the right is blood cells infected with SLE.
Now here's a bit more background information on lupus, specifically regarding lupus's symptoms. Lupus's symptoms are very broad and generic, including fevers, rash, joint pain, and fatigue. As I mentioned earlier, they are very broad and generic, meaning these symptoms are shared with a variety of other diseases. This can make diagnosing lupus particularly difficult because if you wake up one day and you have fatigue and a fever, you could have lupus, but you could just as easily have the flu. Now, this difficulty in diagnosing lupus is compounded by the fact that there's no effective test to definitely determine if you have lupus. Even the most accurate test is only 90% accurate, meaning 1 out of every 10 cases will slip by undetected. Now, treatment for lupus varies by type and severity, with the lowest treatment being ibuprofen and acetaminophen, the moderate treatment being antimalarial drugs, and the highest treatment being corticosteroids and immunosuppressants, which suppress the immune system. Now, on the image, you can see a classic case of the lupus rash occurring on this woman's cheeks. Here you can see a classic example of cell communication and signaling occurring in lupus, specifically in apoptosis. Now, when the body detects a foreign invader or an antigen, it activates the first and second line of defense almost instantaneously. It also specifically does not activate certain immune cells because of their tendency to attack self cells and self tissues as well as the antigen. In someone with lupus, however, there is an abnormality in the cell communication and signaling, specifically in the antigen-presenting proteins. Now, that leads to those immune cells that are supposed to remain deactivated becoming activated. That causes those cells to then target self cells and basically cause other cells to undergo apoptosis. And on the image, you can see after something undergoes apoptosis, it releases a nuclear fragments and a lot of waste.
So to be more specific about what Nitish just said, in a healthy person, there are these cells called tingible body macrophages, and their main role is to actually consume the cellular material that is expelled, as Nitish just said, during apoptosis. As numerous cells going through apoptosis, their job is to consume all this material. So in healthy bodies, TBMs are present in extremely large quantities, whereas in a person infected with SLE, for example, these TBMs are actually found in extremely low numbers. And the problem with this is that lower numbers of TBMs means that there's extracellular material just being left in the immune system, and eventually dendritic cells pick up on this material and they start presenting it to the helper T cells, which in turn forces the body to attack this otherwise regular material. So as you can see in the image on the left, those 4 red bodies are actually TBMs, and that's a healthy person, whereas on the right, there are no TBMs evident, and all of that black image is just cellular material being left in the body.
Now, as Alex said earlier, the TBMs are supposed to collect the apoptotic cells and prevent them and basically consume that waste. However, in a person with lupus, that doesn't happen. Now, you might ask, what happens to that waste? Well, that's a good question. Because that waste isn't consumed and those chemicals that originally prompted the apoptosis to occur still remain in the bloodstream, other cells also begin undergoing apoptosis. This eventually leads to a state called secondary necrosis, which is basically uncontrolled cell death. Now, on the image, you can see how an apoptotic cell is supposed to bind with the blue cell or a TBM. The TBM will then release a certain specific chemical that prevents the apoptotic cell from being recognized as an inflammatory monocyte. However, in a person with lupus, because the TBMs are present in such low quantities, these green cells, or the apoptotic cells, do not get the opportunity to bind with those TBMs, and the TBMs do not release the chemical that are supposed to prevent them from identifying as inflammatory monocytes. This causes the immune system to begin attacking the apoptotic cells and causing the autoimmunity of lupus. Thank you for watching. And that's the way it is.